I've been working as a wildlife officer at the Okefenokee State Park since 2010. It's a pretty great job if I'm being honest. I've always loved nature, and being from the area, the heat and humidity never bothered me. There has been some strange stuff going on lately though. The job doesn't involve a whole lot, mostly just patrolling the swamps to make sure nobody is hunting illegally, and keeping an eye out for any possible fire hazards during the summer months. Really, it's just a peaceful place to be, assuming that you keep plenty of bug spray on you at all times. I've been on the overnight shift for the last few weeks while the regular officer is out on paternity leave. Before he left, he told me that I would probably see a few weird things, typical around the Florida-Georgia line. Method-out rednecks, kids sneaking off into the swamp to bang, and the swamp lights. The first two were typical on day shift too, so I wasn't worried about that. The swamp lights threw me for a loop though. The lights are an old superstition. Supposedly, it's spirits of lost souls that had died in the swamp, trying to lure others to a watery death. There's a natural explanation for it though. Methane and phosphorus gas from the swamp mixes and gives off a glow. It actually looks pretty cool after the first scare it gives you. Those aren't the scariest things that have been happening though. I was out on one of my patrols a couple of weeks ago, in the big van boat that we use to get around the areas where boardwalks haven't been built in. And I noticed something huge floating in the water not far from me. I steered over that way and I focused my spotlight onto it. It was an alligator. Well, it used to be an alligator at one time. This one had been a monster, at least 15 feet tall and built like a truck. It looked like something that had crawled out of Jurassic Park. It had been torn to shreds, gashes all along the length of its body, and the head was barely hanging on. "Hey, Captain," I said into my radio. "What's going on, Smith?" The captain answered back into the radio. She was stationed back at the main office at the swamp entrance. We always kept at least 2 people on shift in case of any accidents, or the rare wildlife attack. "I've got a dead gator out here in Section 14, I said back. I picked up a branch from nearby and I started poking the corpse in the water, and trying to flip it around and see if there were any other distinguishing marks. "Probably just one of the older ones out there. Nature will sort it out," Captain answered back. Dead animals were nothing new in the swamp, especially with the amount of wildlife out here. But this was something that I'd never seen before. "Negative, Cap. This gator is a giant, and it's been ripped apart." "Ripped apart? By what?" She sounded surprised, and I couldn't say that I blamed her. "It beats the shit out of me," I said. I still couldn't tell whether it had been torn apart by claws or teeth. The head had been ripped though. The skin was stretched and the bones were sticking out in jagged pikes. "I'm getting the hell out of here before it comes back though." "You think one of those bears might have done it? Old Methuselah has been a bit more crotchety than usual lately." Methuselah was a big black bear that had been tagged in the swamp back in the late 80s. He was the oldest bear we had had on record out here, and he was somewhat of a local celebrity. He mostly kept to himself, and seemed to get along with most of the gators in the swamp, usually swimming along beside them most of the time. "No way Methuselah could have done this," I said back into the radio. "I'm heading back to the office." "No, head over to the cabin. If there's something big out there, I don't want you out in the open at night. Head in and wait until it's light out. We'll come get ya." Shit. I hated the old cabins. We had a few spread out throughout the swamp because of how large it is, Mostly, they were used as ranger outposts now, but they started out as little hunting cabins back in the early 1900s. They were small and up on huge stilts to keep them out of the water, plus to make sure the black bears didn't wander into them and make a nice little home. I headed over to the nearest one, about a 20-minute ride in the boat. The whole way over, I was going over what in the world could have torn that gator apart. Usually, they're pretty docile. There's plenty of food for them out here, so one wouldn't have any reason to attack a bear for food. And a bear is the only thing out there big enough to have done that. The only ones out here are black bears anyway, and they're more likely to run away than to fight. I coasted up to the cabin and I stopped the boat fan, pulling it towards the nearest stilt and tying it down. With the sound of the fan not overtaking my hearing, I started to notice how quiet it was. Usually, there were cicadas, frogs, crickets, and all kinds of other wildlife making noises all over the swamp. But now, I didn't even hear the usual owls in the trees. It was like everything had run away. Once everything was tied down, I grabbed onto the ladder, and I started to climb up into the cabin. I pushed open the small trap door and I pulled myself in. It smelled like mildew and dirt, but at least it was a safe place to sleep, out of reach of any dangerous animals. I looked around the cabin until I finally found the generator in the corner. Luckily, we have someone come out to these once a month and replace all the gas and make sure that nothing had chewed through the wiring. I would actually have lights and some air conditioning, so tonight wouldn't be too bad. And that's when I realized that the gas canister was mostly empty. And they must have forgotten to hit this one last month. Shit. I still have a supply of batteries down in the boat, and we keep some small lanterns around. But it wouldn't be nearly as good as having all the lights on in the cabin. I looked out the window into the swamp. There was a bright light coming from about 50 feet away. It looked too bright to be one of the swamp lights. "Hey, Captain," I said into my radio. "You got somebody coming out to me right now." "No, you and I are the only ones here tonight," she said back. "Ain't nobody coming out there till the sun comes up." More lights started to pop up near the first one. They were spaced out, but all just as bright. "There's lights out here, Captain. I think they're moving towards me." I tried to hide the shakiness in my voice. The lights were getting closer. "Just hang tight. Try to get some sleep." The radio cut out with a high-pitched burst of static. "Shit. Cap, can you hear me?" It was useless. The only thing coming through was a low buzz of static. I'm screwed. I looked at my watch. It was only 11:19 p.m. I had at least 8 hours before somebody would be out here. The scream started a few minutes later. It sounded like a child. The screams when a kid falls and scrapes their knee and they don't know what to do about it. They were anguished. They were coming from the direction of the lights. "Screw this," I said to myself. "I'm not sticking around for this shit." I grabbed a lantern and a flare gun off of the wall, and I pulled up the trap door to get onto the ladder. I practically jumped down to the boat, and I started to unit it from the stilts. I reached down to the engine to pull the cord. It was gone. The pull cord had been cut off. There was no way to get the fan going. I'm stuck here. The screams grew louder, and I turned to see the lights only a few feet away. I hightailed my ass up that ladder. I could hear something ripping at the boat behind me as I closed the trap door. I heard it splinter on and off of the stilts, and I felt the cabin sway. I've got my cell phone and my signal comes and goes. I'm gonna try keeping updates going if I can. I've got every lamp on in this cabin, and I'm sitting in the corner as far away from any of the windows as I can get. The screaming has stopped, but I can see the glow of the lights coming in through one of the windows. If you're listening, send help. According to the clocking calendar we keep in the cabin, I'd been here for 2 days. Not that I would be able to tell, seeing as the sun hasn't come out this entire time. It's been dark since I got here that night. The only light that I've seen is from those goddamn swamp lights out there, and they've been coming and going as they please. I still don't know what they are, but I know that there's something else out there with them. I've been trying to sleep since I've been here. It's not like I have the ability to do much else. The boat is trashed and one of the stilts in the cabin is splintered, and I sure as hell can't swim out of here. I was looking out of the window last night between naps and I saw something moving between the lights that were out there. It was big, at least the size of an SUV. It went around the perimeter of the cabin, walking on 4 legs. It wasn't a bear, I knew that. We didn't have any bears that size in the swamp. I hope to whatever gods are listening that it isn't a gator. I can't get too good of a look at it with how it's weaving in between the swamp lights, but I saw it knock over a tree on its way through. And so, here we are, 2 days stuck in this shithole of a cabin, surrounded by floating lights that scream, and whatever biological nightmare shambling around out there. I know some people asked why I didn't call the captain using my cell. You really think that I didn't try that? I just get a busy signal. I've been trying to send out text messages too, but they all just show red. I haven't gotten anything back. I really hope that somebody can tell my captain that I'm out here. If they ask, I am in the section 14 through 18 cabin, out near the gator bog. Holy shit, it hit me. If I'm near the gator bog, then there's a boardwalk not too far from here, maybe a mile or two. And that will lead me directly to the swamp entrance and the head office. I looked around the cabin and I found the map that we keep of the entire swamp with all of our trails and stations marked. Okay, I'm in sector 14, and then the boardwalk is 1.5 miles southwest of me, right over the Florida border. I'm going to have to try to sneak out of here though. Maybe I can make a paddle for the boat so that I don't have to swim. I looked around the cabin, taking inventory of what I have available. There are some battery packs, a set of radios, a flare gun, and the emergency rifle with 20 rounds of ammo, plus the lantern and a couple of flashlights, with glow sticks as backup. I think that there's a backup ore in the fan boat, but I'll need to check to be sure. The other thing that I'll have to do is distract the lights, and whatever else that thing is. I may need to use either a flare or a few rounds of ammo. I don't think bullets will hurt the lights though. I thought it over for a few minutes. This was going to take some trial and error before I go anywhere. And I've seen what those things out there can do to a cabin. So, they could break me in half and no problem. I'll load up a flare and I'll see what that does. I have 6 flares in total, so one shouldn't be an issue. I loaded it up, stood at the window, and I took aim at the nearest light. The flare shot off, the red light almost blinding me. Before it landed, I saw it pass through the light. The light changed. It had a face now, gaunt with hollow, black eyes. Sharp teeth showed from the twisted maw, almost as if it was screaming in terror. I heard a roar of anger from it, and it shot towards the cabin, howling. I pulled the shutter, trying to close the window before it got here, desperately hoping that it would keep it out. It banged against the side of the cabin, and I could hear claws scraping against the wood. At least I finally had an answer to their state. They were solid, so maybe bullets could hurt them. Okay, I think I'm ready. There's a small propane tank under the camp stove in the corner. I can rig that to a flare, throw it out there and then shoot it as a distraction. And then I jump down from the trapdoor, land in the boat and row my way out of here. I'm going to wait for a while and observe. That swamp light that I shot at is still howling outside. That's a sound that I'm never going to forget. It's like a child screaming, but warped. As if it's being put through an echo and drawn out. God, I hope I make it out of this hellhole. The radio suddenly let out a burst of static. I could hear a voice coming through. Kaysen, are you out there? Holy shit, it was the captain. Cap, can you hear me? I'm here. I'm in the Section 14 cabin. I shouted back into it. The howling outside got louder, the clawing at the wall more furious. Kaysen, we searched the cabin and you weren't there. Where the hell are you? What does she mean? I've been here for 2 days. They had to have seen my boat outside. Look, we found your boat back near the torn up gator. Just stay where you are, we'll find you. Captain, I'm in the cabin. I haven't left the damn cabin. I shouted back. I was panicking now. If they couldn't find me, what hope did I have? I think leaving is my only hope. I need to get the hell out of here and at least get back to the main office. From there, I can at least be a little more safe behind some cinder block walls instead of this old rickety cabin. I have to go through with my plan. I'm writing this all into my phone and setting it up to go out automatically when I have signal again. If I don't make it, hopefully somebody can read this and find my body. I still don't know what that giant creature is out there, but I assume it's what tore up that gator the other night. I'll try and update again if I can make it out of here. God, please let me make it out of here. I made it. I made it out of that godforsaken swamp. I'm quitting this job and I'm never coming back here again. I don't care about the animals, the nature, the freaking Christmas lights they do. This place needs to burn. I'm getting ahead of myself. I waited in that cabin for another 2 days after my last update, keeping an eye on those things to see if they had any patterns that I could use to get away. There weren't any. Everything they did seemed to hinge on whatever I was doing at the time. I was running out of food, and God knows I wasn't going to drink any of the swamp water to survive. I had the choice to either die in that cabin or to run for it. I gathered up everything that I had left. The flare gun, the rifle, a lantern, and a few glow sticks along with an ore that I had made out of one of the floorboards. I had my utility knife on me too, so that could come in handy. I packed everything together and I got ready. When I opened the hatch, my boat was gone. I heard whatever was out there scratching at the cabin supports last night. They must have cut the line and my boat had drifted off. I'll have to swim for it and hope for the best. The good news was that with the lights floating around, the gators were staying the hell away. I imagined that they were all terrified after what they did to that big one a few days ago. So, my only worries about getting to the boardwalk are the lights, that giant thing out there, and any potential wildlife that may be waiting beyond. I fit a flare into the propane tank handle and I lit it, and then I opened the window shutters and tossed it out as far as I could. I aimed the rifle at the flare and I shot. The explosion rocked the cabin, almost breaking the rest of the beams holding it up. I hurried and I jumped out of the trapdoor and into the water. It was freezing, and I'm on the Georgia-Florida border in August. This water should be a hot tub right now, but it was ice cold to the touch. I almost went into shock when I broke the surface. Thankfully, the adrenaline hit and I started swimming towards the boardwalk. It was a good mile away. I could make it within 15 minutes if I kept a good pace and nothing slowed me down. Over the sound of my splashes, I heard the screaming start again. Tortured, agonizing, I felt the pain it felt somehow. I seized up, stopping where I was in the water, and I looked behind me. The lights were after me, at least 5 of them, and they were gaining fast. I turned and I started swimming again. I can't look back. I have to keep going. My surroundings were getting brighter as they gained ground on me. I don't know why I thought I could outrun them. They were floating and I had to swim through the swamp water, making my way through reeds and muck as I went. There was no way I was going to get to that boardwalk before they got to me. I grabbed one of the flares out of their plastic wrapping in my pocket, and I loaded it into my gun. I looked behind me and I fired at the light closest to the center. The black eyes laughed at me as the flame went through it, exposing all of its terrible features. The teeth were in a smile now, taunting me before they killed me. The flares seemed to slow them down just enough that I got a lead on them. The boardwalk was in my sights. If I could pull myself up on one of the ladders, I just had to run due east until I hit the entrance in the main office. As I reached the ladder, a roar came from the opposite direction. I looked back and I saw that the lights had all converged into one, still keeping pace towards me. The creature was on the other side of the boardwalk from them. I still couldn't make it out clearly, just the immensity of it, but it was coming towards me now. As I climbed the ladder, one of the rungs broke underneath me from the swamp rot. I was plunged back into the water. I went under, looking above me. As dark as that water is with all that dirt and muck, I could see the light getting brighter up above. I wondered if it would be better to just let myself drown here instead of going up to face whatever that was. No, I have to get out. I have to make sure that nobody else goes through this. I broke towards the surface, grabbing onto the ladder and pulling myself up as fast as I could, hopping over the broken rung and hoisting myself up into the walkway. I thought maybe that I would catch a break from the giant out there. With the boardwalk being up so high, we had to build it higher a few years ago because some idiot tried to pet a gator. But it was no luck though. The thing just barreled straight through the supports, toppling a section of it into the water. I got lucky that it was the opposite of the way that I needed to go. I ran as fast as I could, loading up another flare into the gun, holstering it, and then chambering a shot in the rifle. If it came down to it, I was going to be prepared as possible. I grabbed the lantern off my hip and I turned it on. We kept everything in the cabins waterproof for obvious reasons, and this thing lit up everything around in a 30-foot radius. Thank God they didn't cheap out on these things. The swamp lights were still after me, but the giant was closer. I looked back and it came into the light that I was casting. It was a bear. It wasn't alive though. There were bones showing through its matted fur. Part of its brain was hanging off of its head. It looked like a back pay was missing. And worst of all was on its back, where the bones were exposed. It looked like giant spikes had grown out of it, like spines on a lizard. It roared again, the eyes glazed over with death yet showing a primal rage. I was in its territory, and it wasn't happy. I looked ahead and I saw the main office coming up. There was a light coming from that direction, near the end of the boardwalk. It looked like sunlight. Kaysen, are you there? My radio crackled through with the captain's voice. We're at HQ. You still alive out there? There's some men out there looking for you. They say they're federal and they might know where you are. I'm coming, I shouted back into the radio as I ran. I'm on the boardwalk, coming up on HQ. Everything is dark though. Where are you? The radio cackled in and out with more static. I couldn't tell what she was saying. I got closer to the source of the daylight on the boardwalk, and it would have stopped in my tracks if something more terrifying wasn't behind me. Everything around it was dark, but there was just a rip right there in the air surrounding the boardwalk. It looked like a television projecting a sunny day at the swamp HQ. Captain was out there along with some men in suits, and they were aiming something into the tear. I kept up running. The undead bear in the swamp lights hot on my heels. I was going to run right through the tear. I didn't know if it would work, but I had no other choice. The bear roared as daylight hit my skin. Everything changed in that instant. The darkness was gone. It was mid-afternoon and I could hear the birds and bugs of the swamp singing again. The two men came over and started asking me questions. What had I seen? How long was I there? According to Captain, I had been gone for 8 days. They were about to call off the search when these guys showed up. They had told me that they were from something called the Collective, and they asked me that we don't tell anybody about what happened here. Screw that. Don't go to the Okefenokee Swamp. Don't stay there after dark. And they kept mentioning something called an aberration fear and told me that it was completely normal. The things I saw in there were anything but.